Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Coming up, we're headed into a legislative session that has even veteran lawmakers nervous as they face what one calls a funding cliff. Next on Dialogue, 4 State House reporters talk about the changes we might see come out of the Capitol this session, and we take your calls. If you were a lawmaker, where would you go to find additional revenue, or what services would you cut? That's Dialogue. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. Idaho, like many states, is facing a dire legislative session. As the new head of the Senate said at a press briefing Thursday, there are only 3 issues he and his colleagues will be considering: money, money, and money. Tax revenues are back at 2007 levels, while the need for services is still growing, especially during a recession. There's no federal stimulus money, federal match money for Medicaid will drop, and Idaho's reserves are almost tapped out. So what choices are available to lawmakers to both raise revenue and make cuts that will hurt the fewest people possible? With me are 4 legislative reporters who cover these issues every day. John Miller is with the Associated Press. Welcome. Betsy Russell writes for the Spokesman Review. Thanks for being here. Bill Spence is the political reporter for the Lewiston Tribune. Thanks for being here. And our own Tan from Idaho Reports is also with us. Thanks for being here. Thanks. Do you have thoughts on what lawmakers should focus on this session, or what our reporters should be covering? Give us a call toll free at 1-800-973-9800. Well, first, before we get into kind of the gloom and doom news, there was some kind of happy news, I guess, today for the state. Then that is somebody in Idaho who has even happier news, won $190 million in the lottery. And if that person claims that ticket, they owe taxes on that. And depending on whether they take it as a lump sum or over a number of years, the state gets between $9 million and $15 million from that one lottery ticket. So I guess that's some good news, at least to start with.
Probably the only good news that we heard today.
But you'd need something like 20 people to win that amount of money to make a dent in what we're looking at. And speaking of that, what are we looking at? Betsy, we hear all these numbers. What's the shortfall right now?
There's a lot of talk about what is the shortfall right now, and in reality there is no shortfall right now. Our current budget is balanced as it's required by the Constitution to be. In fact, there's a small surplus because the revenues have been coming in ahead of projections. But we have a structural imbalance. The current year's budget has $270 million worth of one-time money built into it that won't be there when they go to set the next year's budget. Plus, there's another $69.5 million in statutory required expenses that they'll have to fund just to keep us where we are now for things like increased numbers of school kids, increased Medicaid caseloads. And so that adds up to a $340 million hole between the revenues that we think we might get next year and what we'd have to do just to keep the state where it is now. And so the question is, how do we get there? Will the revenues grow more? Do they want to get more revenues, or do they want to make cuts, or some combination of the two?
And as you said, as the governor indicated at a press conference, there has been a slight uptick in tax revenues. We're ahead of projections by what, 30 to 35 million?
It was about 30 million at the end of November, and everyone's anxiously awaiting the December numbers to see how much that goes up or down or what.
And there was the beginning of the Economic Outlook and Revenue Assessment Committee, is that right? EORAC? Or what came out of that today? I know that Derek Santos, who's is he the new Mike Ferguson, or is he, he said that he feels we're out of the recession.
He did. He said the good news is the recession is over. The bad news is the recovery is going awfully slowly. And so what we're seeing is growth. And I think that was kind of a theme from the presenters today, was that we are seeing some growth, but it's very, very modest. And it's not enough to make up what's been lost in the recession thus far. And also the committee started hearing from various sectors of the economy. Some are not doing so well.
So we'll hear from the governor on Monday at his State of the State, State of the Budget. What was your sense listening to him today? He also was part of the Associated Press briefing. Do you think that we're looking at some drastic cuts based on his philosophy of government, which he explained today? He wants to stay on course as a conservative?
It sounds like the governor was really big on saying that last year we took steps to try to lean down government, to try to cut our costs, and to try to, last year, although he had suggested, his administration had suggested zero funding certain agencies over a course of a number of years, what they ended up doing is what he called relocating agencies, combining them to try to save money. And he made it pretty clear today in a press conference with the media that he wants to continue on that course and that he feels that government could still be leaned down even more.
And what does that mean? Do you think we'll see big cuts?
I think it's going to be a combination of things. I think that they're going to have to look at cuts, given that most legislators come end of January or early February are probably not going to feel very optimistic about setting a revenue figure that's going to make up for that entire shortfall. So
and most in health and welfare, you think? Or do you think education will once again?
The governor said today that education is going to be his top priority. Now, of course, last year, education was also the top priority and experienced its first overall cut in funding in many, many years, if not the first ever. So a combination of cuts. We heard some discussion today about the possibility of additional revenue.
For the first time, really, in a long time.
In particular, Dennis Lake, who's chairman of the House Revenue and Taxation Committee, said he's going to sponsor a bill that would raise the tax on a pack of cigarettes by $1.25. That would generate, coupled with some other tax increases on other tobacco products, about $51 million a year. Now, you have to be mindful of the fact that the proponents of this are not talking about this as a revenue-generating proposal. It's a public policy proposal. They say that they can reduce youth smoking by, I think, about 19%, because of that increase is going to affect younger smokers who are more
and eventually help the Medicaid budget because there's fewer people going in. But it's a long-term process. And we heard as well some movement maybe on the grocery tax credit as well.
Yeah, that's one of the ideas that's been tossed around. Actually, Dean Cameron, Senator Cameron, the co-chair of the Joint Budget Committee, recommended that last year, if not the year before as well. But nobody was willing to go along with them on that.
Right now, people get a tax credit when they file their taxes,
yeah,
and they're talking
it's a
about
tax credit,
either delaying the increase in that or potentially even suspending it for a while.
Yeah, and it's the tax credit is worth close to $100 million right now. That benefits mostly low-income individuals, but as you say, there is some consideration of postponing the increase or suspending the entire tax.
I think that the governor's role in this is going to be critical, because the last 2 years, when it's been discussed as an option to perhaps inject a little bit more revenue back into the budget, the governor has said, no, I made a commitment.
Right.
I made a commitment to taxpayers that we're going to expand the grocery tax credit. It's going to be, I think, a real important point in the State of the Budget, State of the State speech on Monday, what direction he telegraphs on that.
John, I agree with you on that. I also think that even though I was surprised that so many lawmakers this morning were talking about potential new revenue or revenue enhancement, I certainly wouldn't want to place any bets on any of those ideas actually making it through the legislature. I still see this, and even if some of them do, we're still looking at a mostly all-cut, if not an all-cuts budget, a budget that is balanced primarily through cuts rather than through additional revenue.
I don't know what Betsy thinks about this, but after the November election, when we saw a number of Democrats in the Boise area lose, we saw some of the Senate seats grow more fiscally conservative. The notion that the Idaho legislature is somehow even more ready for tax increases seems somewhat counterintuitive.
Right.
And there was kind of a forewarning of that, because they were saying, the cigarette tax, even though it's being carried by the chairman in the House, we were told, there's been a lot of change in the Senate. Don't expect that everything that's going to go through that.
2 years ago, Dennis Lake was also an advocate of increasing the tax on beer and wine. And that didn't make it out of the Revenue and Taxation Committee. There has been a change in the makeup of the committee. Some of the folks are gone from your region, Jim Clark no longer there, retired from the legislature, but they haven't been replaced by bleeding heart liberals.
So we had a couple of comments come in on Facebook when I asked the question of what would folks like to see, or their thoughts on various issues of the legislature, including the budget. Adrian wrote, "I'd like to see a one-time 0.1% surcharge on all corporate and individual income taxes, with the extra going into a rainy day account. It would make up the shortfall." That sounds probably unlikely.
And I certainly didn't hear that proposal from any of the legislators today.
Sharon says that she said we should be collecting more of the outstanding taxes and supporting what's called the Streamlined Sales Tax Project.
We did hear about that today.
Which we heard about today, both things, collecting outstanding taxes with additional auditors, actually to the point where some people are worried that there's going to be harassment going on, and then also this Streamlined Sales Tax Project, which means ultimately taxing internet sales.
That is the initial step towards getting Idaho to the place where it even could tax internet sales. But that step, that initial step, has been defeated in the House Revenue and Tax Committee repeatedly in the recent years. And today, Dennis Lake, the chairman of that committee, said there has been a change in the makeup of that committee, and he thinks now that it will get out. Now, we still don't know if it would pass the Senate.
I'm willing to bet also that Superintendent Tom Luna may jump into the fray here and advocate, because he's been on the campaign trail, at least during the election season. He kept saying that we needed to do something about collecting internet sales tax to protect education funding.
And of course, as was pointed out today, this is a tax, not a new tax. This is a tax that anybody who purchases things on the internet should be declaring on their tax form. So it's a matter of collecting it. But so far, the legislature has not bought into the Streamlined Sales Tax Project, which is, as you say, is the first step towards doing this.
It did, in fact, make it out of the House Revenue and Taxation Committee, but there was an unusual occurrence. Jim Clark, who was a member of the committee at the time, had a heart attack, and he was home, and his missing vote allowed it to get out of the Revenue and Taxation Committee. And afterwards, I called him up and said, "Hey, did you see what happened?" And he said, "I'm going to make it sure I'm back at the legislature from this heart attack so I can vote it down when it reaches the floor."
He has since retired.
Speaking about taxes, let's talk briefly about the Tax Commission. It's been in the news a lot lately. You've done a lot of reporting on this subject as recently as this week. Summarize for people watching what the latest appears to be, and then some of what we heard today from leadership and from the governor.
Well, initially there's been a lawsuit, and the lawsuit alleges that tax commissioners over the years have given sweetheart deals to politically connected taxpayers. The most recent allegations are completely separate from those, and they've been brought up by employees at the commission who've expressed concerns about some of the actions of Tax Commission Chairman Royce Chigbrow. In one of the instances, employees at the agency say he intervened on a payment plan of a client of his son's accounting firm. Chairman Chigbrow maintains that he has maintained distance from clients or individuals who are represented by his son's firm. Now, in a second instance, employees also say that Chairman Chigbrow intervened in a case involving a friend and political supporter. There was an interesting development today, I thought, when the House Speaker, Lawrence Denny, said that he thought it would be appropriate for there to be an investigation into the matter. Now, Greg Bauer, he's the Ada County prosecutor, told me earlier this evening that the question of what happened in this particular instance is still open. He's interested in gathering information about it and may have his office continue to look into just what happened involving Chairman Chigbrow as he worked together with a friend and political supporter over a tax case.
Chairman obviously was quite close to the governor. The governor was asked today about this matter, and he said no comment.
It was a rather terse answer.
Right, and he was asked if he had asked for the chairman's resignation, and he said no comment.
Right. Let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about Republican leadership changes in the Senate. And Bill, Joe Stegner is no longer in leadership, and he's from your area. What do you think accounts for that? And,
it was
his
interesting.
Replacement is Chuck
Winder, Senator Chuck Winder
from down here.
Yep, and I think if I remember correctly, it's been something in the neighborhood of 30 years since there was a forced change in a leadership position. Senator Stegner definitely is one of the more moderate Republicans in the legislature. Certainly, I would see him as more moderate than Senator Winder on social issues.
So do you think that's in part why he lost his position, because he was too moderate for the caucus?
There some of the changes on the Senate side of things in the November election. There were more conservative senators joining that body, so that may have been part of the issue. Senator Stegner can also has very strong and well-informed opinions, which sometimes may trump what the caucus believes is the direction that should go, and maybe that was part of it, that the caucus members felt more comfortable with Senator Winder.
Although he has become chair, right?
Yes, after he lost his leadership position, he did end up getting the chairmanship, replacing Senator Hill as chairman of the Senate Local Government and Taxation Committee.
Let's talk about Senator Hill. He is the new Senate pro tem in charge. What do we know about him and his style? Certainly, it was evident today that he was very direct in his responses. It was also evident to me, at least, that Dean Cameron, who's on the House side, was saying it's going to take some getting used to having all new leaders on the Senate side, and perhaps misses the former Senate pro tem who might have been a mentor. What do we know about Brent Hill and his style?
Well, he's a CPA from Rexburg, and you're right, he is very direct and he's engaging, and he's not afraid to answer questions. A lot less timid, I would say, than the Speaker of the House.
Absolutely. He's very direct. He's passionate. He's thoughtful. He really looks into issues. And he cares about them, and he talks about them. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how his leadership style develops. He will absolutely be engaged. He will not be a hands-off, standoffish leader in the Senate.
And you do get a sense that he identifies with real world or real people issues, because he does talk about his experience with his own CPA, with his own accounting clients, and also with his own family members. That's what it seemed like to me.
One of the things that I think is interesting is he appears to be very dedicated to the position, and one example of that is he's stepping away from his accounting firm. Next year he's going to sell his partnership, and it's possible that he wants to focus more on his job as the head of the Senate.
He warned people, saying that there's going to be a lot of unhappiness, and it's not going to be a fun place. He was very, very direct that there's going to be some extremely tough choices, as was Senator Cameron. Cameron saying that he didn't ever recall in his 20-year career there ever feeling more challenged by a legislative session. For me, I noted that these lawmakers, who are being very honest with their feelings, their worries and their anxieties about what's coming up, seemed a little bit more dour and down than the governor, who seemed very optimistic, and we're going to keep on the course that we've been going on. And it was interesting to see.
Well, they're very close to the issues and very close to the bills. And I thought what was really interesting today is that Senator Cameron, the head of the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, announced that they are planning on having public hearings for the first time.
Yes, that was very interesting. JFAC will change the way it does business. Two of the germane committees, Education and Health and Welfare, will be allowed to sit in and give comments on legislation based on what happened last year, where JFAC was felt to exceed its boundaries in the education area, and the public can come in and testify on some
Two open public hearings. And I think I got a sense today that Senator Cameron had a few misgivings about how it might go. He said it may just be a day when a bunch of people come in and complain. We hope that's not what it is, but we feel like if we're going to make this significant of changes in government services, and those two public hearings are going to focus specifically on public school funding and health and welfare funding, and those are the two areas where very crucial services could be cut. He said, if we're going to make such significant cuts, we need to hear from the public.
But I think you're right. He also mentioned that this is on a trial basis. So if it is just a 2 or 3 hour gripe session where people come in and lob complaints,
well, I think
it may be
they know
short-lived.
That there's going to be some huge cuts coming, and they want to give the public an opportunity to talk about how those, say in Medicaid, are going to affect them personally. Let's hear from a member of the public, Robert in Moscow. Robert, go ahead, please.
Yes, concerning the possibility of taxing internet sales, I don't see how it could be easily enforced without hiring a large increase in staff, which would defeat the purpose of hiring these people. I mean, if you're hiring lots of people, a lot of the tax money's got to go to pay them, and I don't see it as being a cost-benefit analysis being overly productive. What do you think about that?
Thank you very much for your call.
Well, that's a good point, that it would be hard for Idaho's State Tax Commission to enforce, online sales going all over the world. The only way that taxing internet sales will happen is on a national basis.
Right.
Congress would have to act.
Yes.
And so that's why Idaho wants to join this multi-state group, which has dozens of states looking at this, simply to get in a position where their definitions in their tax code match up enough that if Congress were to say states who have a certain amount of uniformity could go after internet sales, then Idaho could be a part of it. But Idaho could not do it on its own.
It's complex
for
the salespeople too, because each state has a different tax rate as well. So it's hard for the providers of the
That's the whole reason behind the uniformity push. The Supreme Court decided that trying to have allowing states to tax in the instance of the Quill case, it wasn't internet sales. I believe it was catalog sales, but trying to collect things when states had such different taxing structures would be unconstitutional. And so the whole reason for putting together the uniform or streamlined sales tax effort, where you have all of the states or many of the states on board, is trying to create a uniform mechanism.
We're rapidly running out of time. I want to get to some other bills. Immigration. There was, it seemed both from the governor and from leadership, a sense that we will see a bill, maybe an Arizona-style bill with some things removed that cause constitutional issues, but nobody wanted to go any further in talking about that. But it does appear that we will see some sort of bill directed at undocumented people here.
We have seen multiple immigration bills in recent years, and very few of them have passed into law. We may well see that same dynamic.
Because big business has not supported them?
And in particular, the agricultural industry, which is very influential in our state, has had a different perspective from those who were pushing the bills.
And also one of the most vocal senators in the legislature, Mike Jorgensen, was not reelected, so he used to be a major proponent of many of these bills in the past.
I just wonder
another one of the individuals who pushed for an immigration-related bill last year is no longer in the legislature either, and that's Representative Raul Labrador, who's the new congressman.
Somebody wrote in, Krista, wanting to know if whether there's a chance that Idaho's Human Rights Act will be amended to include protections for gays and lesbians.
There have been emotional debates about this in past years, but it has never proceeded very far. And I think, given the most recent changes in our legislature, its chances may be even worse now.
Hasn't it always died in the Health and Welfare Committee?
It's died.
Well,
I think it was state.
What's happened in the past 2 years is the Idaho Human Rights Commission itself has not endorsed such a proposal. In the past, it did, but now the actual commission members haven't supported it, so that makes it even tougher. There is going to be an anti-bullying statute that will include a statement of protections for young people in the schools to not be bullied who have identified themselves as gays and lesbians. And as I understand it, that might be carried by a Republican. So that'll be interesting to see where that anti-bullying statute goes. It derives a lot of its push from the suicides that we've seen across the country.
And Idaho has a very high suicide rate compared to other states, including teen suicides.
Wolves were mentioned as well. We cannot get through a session without something having to do with wolves. When I talked to Speaker of the House, Denny, he was a little vague, but they're still very, very upset about the wolves being put back on the endangered species list. So it seems like we may see something there. But the biggest area seems to be in the area of health and welfare and Medicaid. And what I heard today was they're really, really looking again towards the hospitals and now the nursing homes. Maybe somebody can explain this, to help out with this gap by assessing themselves.
The Idaho Hospital Association already last year agreed to a voluntary assessment of $25 million per year for 2 years. And the reason for that is that Idaho, for every dollar it spends in Medicaid services, it takes in close to $4 in federal matching funds. So the idea is that the hospitals would provide some additional money and by doing so prevent even larger cuts.
And it sounds like a deal has been cut with the nursing homes as well to maybe do that.
It sounds like that's the next area
because
that they're
the match rate that was pumped up from the federal government for Medicaid is going to drop back down again.
But it still only drops back down to 70-some percent.
70-some
Yeah,
percent.
so it's still almost more than a 3-to-1 match for. So it's still a better business decision for Medicaid providers to come up with this voluntary assessment.
So
But I imagine this is the year that I think that we've already seen some cuts over the last several months in this fiscal year, and I think that we're going to start to hear more stories. We've already heard, I think last summer, there was a person in Pocatello who was randomly shot by somebody who lost his meds, or he couldn't pay for his meds because he was taken off of the state system. So we're going to see stories like that are going to come before the legislature.
Well, and what is considered often across the country one of the easier isn't the best word, but more common cuts to make, which was in dental service. That was strongly protested here in Idaho, and the governor, rescinded on that. So there's a constituency for every one of these programs.
And not only that, but there's sound fiscal reasons for continuing some of the Medicare payments that the optional Medicaid payments, as prescription drugs being an example, that if the state cuts its payments for prescription drugs, it may end up paying more in terms of higher incarceration rates or institutionalization for individuals.
But the cuts have to come somewhere. It'll be interesting to see what the governor says in his State of the State. You will be carrying that. We will be carrying that live. Folks can watch. We have a graphic for if they want to watch the State of the State on Monday, January 10th. We'll be covering that live at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, noon Pacific. And Idaho Reports starts up in a little over a week. People can watch that every Friday at 8 p.m. You've got it's an hour long. You've some interesting segments. You're changing things up a little bit.
And viewers can also watch us online anytime. And Betsy will be a regular guest.
Right.
And Bill and John, you'll be on too, just so you know. And
always important for people to interact, to feel that they can interact, through social media. And now we're all hooked in through that. As we wrap up, we've got about a minute left. Do you have any predictions on the length of the session? Everyone today seemed to think it would be short because there's so little money to
that has certainly
deal with.
Not been the pattern in the past. When there's talk of a possible revenue increases, those are when we have seen the longest and most bitter sessions in our state's history. And I should say that the definition of short, what they're aiming for this year, I think is go until April 1st.
Interesting. Well, I want to thank you personally for all being down there covering the legislature. I did it for many years, and I know how tough it is and how important it is to have State House reporting for the public to know how their tax money is being spent and what their lawmakers are doing. So thank you very much, and thank you, our viewers, for tuning into Dialogue. We hope you'll join us same time next week. Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. To order a copy of this program from Idaho Public Television, call our toll-free number or visit us on the World Wide Web